Tom Bombadil has been confirmed for the Rings of Power.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
So we had some news yesterday about the Rings of Power Season 2, which sadly I couldn't get to yesterday, but I thought I would still have a quick talk about it today. Vanity Fair released an article saying Tom Bombadil finally steps forth in the Rings of Power, an exclusive first look. And as you can quite obviously tell, we get our first images of Tom Bombadil in the Rings of Power Season 2 with the Stranger, aka not Gandalf. And initially, the very first thing you see is this big picture of the Stranger sitting down and Tom Bombadil stood over him staring at him, which means we finally have our first live action adaptation of Tom Bombadil. And of course, people who know Tom Bombadil, who love Tom Bombadil, know all about what he should be wearing. Bright blue his jacket is. Yeah, pretty bright. And his boots are yellow. Not so yellow, more brown, but yeah, okay, we'll go with it. We know that we had some issues with the costumes in Season 1, especially the armor, and they probably didn't want to make him stand out too much because, you know, that's how it is, because that's how the show seems to be, but already he doesn't seem as bright and vivid as I ever pictured Tom Bombadil, but that might just be me. A lot of people also look at this and think he looks fantastic. But anyway, as we actually get into the article itself, it reads, Tom Bombadil has finally been invited on one of the long and winding road trips through Middle-earth. So there was a bit of an introduction about him, talking about how he's in the Fellowship, and also really mentioning how he was excluded from the adaptations by Ralph Bakshi or Peter Jackson. And you might think that there was good reason for them doing so, and they did think so when telling The Lord of the Rings. But these guys now think that old Tom has good reason to be in the Rings of Power Season 2. As they say, he's finally getting his moment in the sun. They even put that they will finally feature Tom Bombadil along with his jolly songs and his flamboyant wardrobe. Now, the flamboyant wardrobe doesn't look quite as flamboyant as I would hope when it comes to Tom Bombadil, but again, we got 4 images. Maybe it appears brighter, better when actually in the episode. But it's showing we are gonna get songs. Now, I'm hoping this doesn't mean in the sense of we're going to get anything like a musical episodes like some TV shows have done, and I'm hoping the songs work just like they should with Tom Bombadil. My only issue is that could be quite jarring for a lot of viewers, so I don't know how they're going to try and do this. There is a reason Tom Bombadil hasn't been adapted until now. He's a very difficult character to put on screen and not come across odd, maybe for the better word. But they're saying there's going to be songs and it will be interesting to see. Obviously, we will see all this when the second season starts on August 29th, which it's also interesting to note that there is a new book being released, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which also has an August 29th release date, which should include some previously unpublished poems about Bombadil. So whether any of these previously unpublished poems are the kind of story we're going to see here and explain where he is, we'll maybe find out then. Those release dates being so close together does make you think it could be. But anyway, as we continue with the article, it mentions about J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay trying to figure out what they're going to do with him, and saying these words. There's a reason why he hasn't been in prior adaptations, because in some ways he's sort of an anti-dramatic character. He's not a character who has a particularly strong agenda. He observes drama, but largely doesn't participate in it. In the Fellowship of the Ring, the characters kind of just go there and hang out for a while. Tom drops some knowledge on them. Knowledge that's not particularly relevant to anything that they're doing or about to do. Now, I can't see this being the case with the show. They wouldn't introduce, or I would hope they wouldn't introduce a character who would just come down, say a few things that have nothing to do with anything that's going on. They're going to make him have an impact and an influence on what is actually happening. In other words, he is going to obviously be pushing the Stranger in the direction that he needs to go to maybe fight the people that Tom wants him to fight, and doing all this so Tom doesn't have to do anything himself. Which is now where we get a second closer up picture of Tom Bombadil, who I haven't actually mentioned yet, but is played by Rory Kinnear, who is an English actor who has been in things like Penny Dreadful, The Imitation Game, James Bond, and from what I can tell, he has done a bit of theatre as well. Again, the beard and the hair look good, the hat seems fine, Generally, it's not the worst look they could have had, it's just not as vivid and bright as I would really hope for Tom Bombadil. And there's something that I do notice with a few of these pictures, but I will come to that later at the end. And then the article goes on to basically talk about how Bombadil saves the hobbits in the Fellowship of the Ring and that little bit of an adventure they have there. So Payne then goes on to say, he can be a force for good, but he is challenging to integrate dramatically in that he doesn't have an agenda. He's not driving forward and pushing people to arrive at any particular end. So you can see they're unsure what to do with him, which does kind of beg the question of why try to include him, but again, won't go too much into that right now. The article continues with saying how Tolkien himself was kind of hazy about what the character's purpose was. He was saying that basically he didn't have a purpose. He was just there. He existed. He's just Tom. That's him. He represents something that's missing, represents something that's fading away, but he's just there. He doesn't try to force himself on anything. He doesn't try to impact anything. He's just Tom. Of course, there's many rumors and ideas about who or what Tom and Goldberry could actually be, which of course I've got videos on the channel if you'd like to go look at, because it really just shows that there's no definitive answer. The article goes on to mention a letter from 1954, basically explaining how Bombadil chose to break his neutrality and help the hobbits, so showing that when there is a good and a bad side, beauty against ruthless ugliness, tyranny against kingship, Tom will still come forth and question the right and wrongs, and maybe step in at this point. Basically at this point defending themselves for any impact and influence that their Tom Bombadil will have. With it also saying Tolkien describes Bombadil as a natural pacifist view which always arises in the mind when there is war. Ultimately, only the victory of the West will allow Bombadil to continue or even survive. Nothing would be left for him in the world of Sauron. Then the next section is Payne talking again, and this is one of these moments that may seem like a nothing moment, but it does continue to worry me. So we're talking about Bombadil again. We know he cares about the natural world, and we know he is a helper. He's not going to push you, but he will help you. And so, traditionally, he lives in this place called the Withywindle, which is this sort of almost enchanted forest. Now, I'm sure most of you have already seen this point and know about it, but the Withywindle isn't the place. Withywindle is a river that flows through the Old Forest. The Old Forest is where he lives. And just a little bit like this for the showrunner when coming out in an interview in Vanity Fair to get this kind of thing wrong about a character they're trying to get us pumped about. I will admit most people will not know this. People who aren't big fans of the book will not have any idea this is wrong, won't care this is wrong. It's in theory an honest mistake if you don't know the books that well. But these are the people making this show, and these little things are important to us who love the lore, and it's why it does worry me. Like, it's just another instance of them not truly knowing the thing they're adapting. So although that may be a point of nothing, it is something I wanted to bring up. And then it goes on to say, for the series, Payne and McKay took the liberty of giving Bombadil a second home on the outskirts of a region called Rhûn. In our story, he has gone out to the lands of Rhûn, which we learn used to be sort of Edenic and green and beautiful, but now is sort of a dead wasteland, Payne says. Tom has gone out there to see what's happened as he goes on his various wanderings. Now, I can get on board with the various wanderings if I'm honest, because I'm pretty sure it says that it is in the Third Age that Tom permanently sets himself in the Old Forest, and that he did used to wander before that. So of course, in the Second Age, Tom wandering isn't the worst thing in the world. But his reasons for being there and setting up a home there is a little bit more different. If it was Bombadil completely on a wander, no home, no base, nothing like that, then maybe it could almost make more sense, and that might be me clutching at straws. But to set up a second home out here, that kind of feels a bit more grasping at something that wouldn't maybe happen. Again, though, I might just be being very picky here when it's not needed. Because this, of course, means that Bombadil is also going to now meet the Stranger, Nori, and Poppy. As Payne continues to say, he nudges the Stranger along his journey, which he knows will eventually protect the larger world that he cares about. So I'd say our Tom Bombadil is slightly more interventionist than you see in the books, but only by 5% or 10%. Now, 5% or 10% really wouldn't be much at all. I'm going to get the feeling it's going to be more like 50 to 100% more, but we can only give it time and wait and see. We're not really going to see this just from pictures. The article then goes on to talk a bit more about Kinnear, who's playing Tom, how he didn't know anything about the character when he got offered the role, and that it was his wife who was really excited about it, and that kind of showed to him that it was a really fan favourite character and he needed to be careful with it. Now, the actors have said this before, and I feel like the actors do truly like their characters a lot more than maybe the showrunners do. So, although he might want to do right by Tom Bombadil, that's not going to convince me that that's what's going to happen in the show itself. Continuing now, we now do get another image of Tom stood outside what I'm assuming is his home in Rune, and this time no bright blue jackets. You see his boots, they are yellowy. To me they look kind of a bit more brown, mustardy brown. This might just be a photo thing, maybe in the show itself they will be made to be that brighter yellow, more Tomish, but yeah, it's just strange to see Tom Bombadil in a landscape such as this. There's not the old forest, but again, that doesn't mean that's wrong. And then as we continue more towards the end of the article, there is a slight mention of Goldberry, who we don't even see here, but we can only assume she's going to be in the show at some point, although we also thought that with Celeborn, so who knows who's going to appear first. And then from there, the rest of the article is kind of just talking a bit more about Tom Bombadil, the kind of character he might be, but doesn't necessarily say anything all that important. The whole article does end though with, as Smith puts it, perhaps the only answer to the enigma that is Tom Bombadil is to simply accept that, as Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings, he is. And so yeah, that is what the article is saying. And again, this is a tiny thing. It's 4 photos with a little article. I'm trying really not to read too much into it, but it just kind of gives me that feeling of more of what I didn't enjoy about season 1 that they're going to do more of in season 2. They're bringing these characters like Tom Bombadil, who doesn't really have anything to do with the Rings of Power, which is what this show was supposed to be about. I wanted to be on Numenor. I didn't want to be off on a wandering adventure with a couple of Harfoots and a stranger, just because it's a cool nod to the lore. I like those nods to the lore when it makes sense, but they seem to do it more in this show when it is completely irrelevant to anything they're trying to actually tell. They've probably understood how popular a character Tom Bombadil is, and they thought they couldn't not have him in the show. Surely for ratings, only benefit from having him. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a success. Because as I kind of hinted at earlier, when I look at all these photos they've released, one thing really stands out to me about them all. Every time we see Tom in these few images, there is no smile. He does not look happy. Where is that merry jolly fellow that is Tom Bombadil? The one who, when you think of him, you think of songs, happiness, a jovial nature. He looks serious. He looks worried. He just doesn't scream Tom Bombadil to me at all. Now I know it's only a few images, so you can't read too much into it, but surely that first image they release of Tom Bombadil should be one where he looks happy. I mean, look at all the artwork that has been created of Tom Bombadil by so many incredible artists over the years. When does he ever not look happy in those? Everyone pictures him this way. So getting 4 separate images, when none of which he does look happy, it just doesn't scream Tom Bombadil to me. Again, that might be something I'm looking too much into. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but I guess we'll wait and see. There is one rumour that I would like to address at the end here, and this was from quite a while ago, and I'm very sorry if someone particularly started this rumor because I'm not sure where it began, but there was something that came out that potentially Tom Bombadil and Goldberry could have been Morgoth and Ungoliant trapped in these forms, serving out their punishment for what they did. Now, please don't do that. Just don't. That would be awful. It would be very Rings of Power-y to do, but hopefully from the way they've talked in the interview, they've tried to push you away from that, and it's not going to be the case, as was with the case with how Brown Sauron and Stranger Gandalf kind of feels. I can't even 100% rule it out, so I thought I'd bring it up, and we'll hope that it doesn't go that way. And then finally, it's probably also worth a mention, if we quickly fly back to that first image of Tom Bombadil and the Stranger, there are all these markings on his ceiling, very much like the Stranger was probably trying to draw in season 1, so there must be something that they're both being linked to. Maybe the Stranger will see these on Tom Bombadil's ceiling, and they'll bond and get an idea over something like that, or the Stranger's come into his home and draw them himself to show Tom because maybe he's still not speaking properly, who knows. But there's definitely something there, and I feel like they've purposely shown us that ceiling with such a big headspace. And that's kind of it though. There isn't much to go on this. It's a few pictures talking about Tom Bombadil, and I know this came out yesterday, so I might be a little bit late releasing this, but I still thought it would be good just to go over it for all of you who wanted me to. And with that, I'd kind of like to know from all of you, what are you feeling about this Tom? Are you worried that he doesn't look happy, or are you just happy that he has been included in a live action adaptation? And with that, thank you for joining me with this video today, reaching the very end of it as well. Please drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, do all the great stuff. It does still massively help me grow and really push the channel if you do so I really appreciate it. And I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.